I put the turkey in the oven at exactly noon, as I had done every year for the past 10 years. Zephyr always said that no one could cook poultry like me, although compliments from my daughter had become rare lately. The thermometer read 185 degrees Fahrenheit, the perfect temperature for slow cooking. I had plenty of time to prepare everything else and reflect on how dramatically our family had changed over the past 2 years. The house on Maple Street smelled of cinnamon and rosemary. I bought it 42 years ago when I first moved to Selbyville and got a job as a vice principal at the local high school. Zephyr was only 3 years old at the time, and she would run around these rooms laughing and playing hide and seek behind the massive oak table in the living room. The same table where the three of us would be having dinner in a few hours. She would climb onto my lap when I was checking school papers in the evenings and fall asleep to the steady rustling of paper. Martha used to joke that we were raising a future accountant. Little Zafira loved to play with my calculator and press the buttons seriously, pretending to solve important problems. I peeled the potatoes and cut them into large pieces. My hands worked automatically. 73 years of life had taught me to do many things without thinking. Every movement of the knife was precise and confident. I learned to cook after Martha's death, when I realized that I had little choice. Either learn to cook or eat semi-finished products for the rest of my life. When I was young, I dreamed of becoming a chef, but my father insisted that I get a teaching degree. A stable job, he said. Now, after so many years, I understood that he was right, albeit for other reasons. My deputy headmaster's pension allowed me to live comfortably and not depend on the mercy of my children. Although the very word mercy, as applied to Zephyr, now sounded not just bitter, but downright mocking. While the potatoes were boiling, I set the table. White plates with gold rims, the very ones Martha and I bought for our first apartment in Boston back in 1974. Back then, we were young and naive, believed in family values, and thought that children would always be grateful to their parents for their care and love. Martha died 12 years ago, but I still set the table for three, as if she could still come and sit in her place by the window. Zafira suggested several times that I remove my mother's plate, saying that it was unhealthy and prevented me from moving on. I refused every time. Some traditions are more important than logic, and who cares about my habits as long as I live in my own house and pay for it with my own money? 2 years ago, my daughter first mentioned that I needed help. At the time, I thought she was offering to come over more often, help around the house or with shopping, maybe keep a lonely widower company. Zafira had always been a practical girl. Even as a child, she made to-do lists and kept track of the family budget when Martha was ill. I was proud of her organization and thought she had inherited my pedantry and responsibility. But it soon became clear that Zafira had a completely different kind of help in mind. She started talking about age, sensible decisions, and how it's not safe for lonely elderly people to live alone in such a big house. Last year, the conversations became more insistent and systematic. Zafira came more often than usual, but not to spend time together or talk about her work. She carefully inspected the house as if she were an appraiser, asked strange questions about my health, and insisted that I show her my latest medical reports. She asked me to tell her about my daily routine, what I ate, whether I took vitamins, whether I remembered to turn off the gas. Caspian supported his wife silently but eloquently, nodding at the right moments, sighing heavily when the conversation turned to my stubbornness. Sometimes he would cast meaningful glances at the antique furniture, the paintings in heavy frames, the old clock on the mantelpiece, the mahogany bookcase. I noticed these glances and began to understand their true value. I took the cranberry sauce out of the refrigerator, the one I bought at the store, even though Martha always made it herself according to her grandmother's recipe. After her death, I never learned how to make it properly, despite having the recipe written down. My attempts always turned out either too sweet, too sour, or simply tasteless. Zafira knew this very well, but she never offered to teach me my mother's method of preparation or even just to help. It used to upset me, but now I understood. My daughter didn't want to waste time on such trifles. She had bigger and more profitable plans. The strange thing started about 3 months ago, although now I realize that the preparatory work had been going on for much longer. At first, I noticed that someone was neatly rearranging the papers on my desk. Nothing was missing, but the order was slightly disturbed. I have always been meticulous with documents, 35 years as a head teacher taught me to put everything in its place and keep track of every document. Insurance policies were in the left drawer in alphabetical order, bank documents were in the right drawer by date, and medical certificates were in a separate folder on the top shelf of the cabinet. But several times I found documents out of place, as if someone had studied them and hurriedly put them back. At first, I blamed it on my own absent-mindedness, then on the effects of new blood pressure medication, but gradually I became seriously concerned. Then a copy of the will disappeared. I always kept the original in a safe deposit box at the bank on Main Street, but I kept a certified duplicate in my desk for everyday needs. One morning, while looking for my car insurance, I discovered that the duplicate will was missing. I methodically searched the entire house, room by room, every drawer and folder, but I couldn't find it. I had to go to the notary and explain that I needed another copy. The elderly secretary asked in surprise why I needed a third copy in 6 months, and I lied about accidentally spilling coffee and ruining the documents. Last week, I overheard a phone conversation with Sapphira that cleared everything up. She didn't know I was home. Usually on Thursday afternoons, I go to the city library to read the latest magazines and chat with other regulars in the reading room. But that day, I canceled my visit because of a severe headache. I took a pill and lay down in the bedroom. My daughter was talking to someone on the phone in the kitchen, thinking that the house was completely empty and no one would hear her. I got up to get some aspirin and heard a familiar voice, calm, businesslike, professional. The words incapacity, medical examination, psychiatric evaluation, and expedited procedure were clear enough for me to understand the gist of the conversation and the scope of the plans. Sapphira was talking to one of the lawyers, discussing details and possible obstacles, as if she were developing a complex insurance scheme for a particularly important client. I didn't make a scene right away or demand explanations in the heat of the moment. Instead, the next day I went to see my lawyer, the same gray-haired gentleman who had drawn up my will 15 years ago and helped me file all the paperwork after Martha's death. I told him in detail about my suspicions, the missing papers, and the conversation I had overheard, and asked him to explain my rights in such a situation. The lawyer listened very attentively, took notes, asked a few clarifying questions about the family's financial situation, and then explained everything with professional candor. What I learned turned out to be much worse than my darkest fears. It turns out that having an elderly person declared incompetent is not such a complicated or lengthy procedure, especially if there are caring relatives willing to testify to strange behavior, and a loyal doctor who will confirm a decline in cognitive function. The turkey was almost ready. I pierced it with a long fork. The meat came off the bone easily, and the skin was golden and crispy. Another half hour in the oven, and it would be ready to take out. During that time, I managed to prepare a side dish of green beans with roasted almonds, Zephyr's favorite dish in her childhood and youth. She always asked for a large portion and laughed when the almond flakes fell from her fork onto the tablecloth. Martha scolded her gently, more for show, and then secretly gave her daughter a second helping. I wonder if Sapphira remembers these family trifles, or if her head is now occupied exclusively with the size of my bank account and the cost of real estate in downtown Selbyville. The sun was slowly setting, bathing the living room in soft golden tones. Our dear guests would arrive in an hour. I carefully straightened the linen napkins on the table, made sure the red wine was breathing in the decanter and the white was chilling in the right glasses. Everything had to be perfect. Tonight's dinner could be the last family celebration in this house, and I wanted it to be memorable for everyone. In the bedroom, in the bottom drawer of the bedside table, under Martha's old letters, lay a thin red folder. I had gone through its contents several times over the past few days, checking every document. Audio recordings of telephone conversations made on an old tape recorder, photocopies of documents that had mysteriously moved around the house, a detailed legal opinion on the rights of the elderly and liability for abuse. If Sapphira and Caspian were really going to go through with it, this family dinner would be a very painful and costly surprise for them. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, interrupting my thoughts. I opened the door and smiled as naturally as I could. Sapphira stood on the doorstep in the dark blue coat I had given her for her last birthday, and next to her stood Caspian with a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums and a bottle of wine. They looked like the perfect family couple coming to a traditional dinner with their beloved father. Dad, Zafira hugged me, and I smelled the familiar scent of her perfume, the same one she wore in college. How are you? You look great. Thank you, dear. You look great too. I took the bouquet from Caspian and shook his hand. Come in, take off your coats. Dinner's almost ready. Caspian nodded silently and hung his jacket in the hall. He was never a talkative man, but today he seemed even more reserved than usual. His gaze slid over the walls of the hall, lingering on the old photographs and the antique mirror in its carved frame. I noticed how he looked appraisingly at the mahogany parquet floor. It smells divine, said Zafira, taking off her coat. Have you been cooking all day? Since this morning. I wanted everything to be like it used to be when Mom was alive. I led them into the living room. Sit down, I'll bring some snacks. They settled into armchairs by the fireplace. Caspian immediately took out his phone and started typing something, ignoring his surroundings. Zafira looked around the room with the attentive gaze of an insurance agent accustomed to assessing clients' property. Dad, have you thought about installing an alarm system? She asked when I returned with a tray of cheese and olives. These days, it's not safe for a single person to live in such a big house without protection. Selbyville isn't New York, Zafira. Everyone knows each other here. I set the tray on the coffee table. And what is there to steal? Old furniture? Don't say that, Caspian said, looking up from his phone. You have a lot of valuable things here. Antiques are very expensive these days, especially 19th century furniture. I was surprised by his knowledge. Caspian had never shown any interest in antiques before, but now he spoke with authority, as if he had studied the subject specifically. Do you know anything about antiques? I asked. A little. I've read about investing in art. He buried his face in his phone again. Times are unstable. You need to diversify your assets. Caspian is right, Zafira agreed. And besides, Dad, you have to think about safety. What if you get sick? What if you fall? Who will know? Who will help? Her voice sounded caring, but I saw something else in her eyes. The cold calculations she usually displayed at work, sorting through insurance claims and looking for ways to minimize payouts. I have an emergency call button, I reminded her. You insisted on having it installed 2 years ago. That's not enough. Zafira picked up an olive and chewed it thoughtfully. You know, I have a client, Mrs. Harrington. She's 82 and recently moved into a wonderful retirement home. She says her only regret is not doing it sooner. A retirement home? I felt the muscles in my neck tense. Zafira, I'm 73, not 90. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. No one is suggesting an immediate move, Caspian quickly interjected, but it's worth thinking about in advance. Planning ahead is sensible. We moved into the dining room. I brought in the turkey on a large platter, and Caspian even whistled in admiration. The bird was perfect, golden brown with a crispy crust. I sliced the meat thinly and arranged the side dishes on plates. Zafira tasted the beans with almonds and smiled. Just like when we were kids, she said. Remember how Mom always made this dish for holidays? Of course I remember. I poured wine into the glasses. She taught me the recipe before she died. She said it was important to preserve family traditions. We ate in silence for a while. The food was really good, and I was proud of myself. But the atmosphere remained tense. Caspian kept glancing at his watch, as if he were in a hurry to get somewhere. Zafira poked at her plate with her fork and occasionally glanced at me inquiringly. Dad, how's your health? She finally asked. Is your blood pressure normal? Have you had any tests done recently? Everything's fine. I saw Dr. Mitchell last week. He said I'm in great shape for my age. Dr. Mitchell is old, Caspian remarked. He's about to retire himself. Maybe you should find a younger doctor. Modern diagnostic methods? What don't you like about Mitchell? He's been watching our family for 20 years. That's exactly why, said Zafira. Old doctors sometimes don't notice age-related changes. They get used to the patient and don't see the obvious. What obvious? I put down my fork. Zafira, what are you talking about? Nothing specific, just... She exchanged a quick glance with her husband. We're just worried. You've become more absent-minded. Last week you forgot to turn off the stove when we came over. It was a lie. I remembered that day perfectly well. The stove was off. I checked twice. But Zafira spoke with confidence and Caspian nodded in agreement. I didn't forget the stove, I said calmly. Dad, you might not have noticed. My daughter's voice softened, almost sympathetic. It's normal at your age. All older people have minor memory lapses. I'm 73, not 90, I repeated, and my memory is excellent. Of course, Safira agreed too quickly. But prevention won't hurt. There are special tests that help detect the early stages of age-related changes. Caspian poured himself more wine and cleared his throat. My father didn't want to admit there was a problem either, he said thoughtfully. He said everything was fine, that we were overreacting. And then the neighbors found him. He had been sitting at home for 3 days with a broken hip because he had forgotten where his phone was. It was completely different with your father, I objected. He had Alzheimer's, which starts with minor forgetfulness, Safira added softly. Dad, we're not suggesting anything drastic. Just a checkup, for our peace of mind. I looked at my daughter, at her neat hairstyle, her expensive suit, her manicure, which surely cost more than my weekly pension. She looked like a successful businesswoman who was used to getting her way, and now she was getting something from me. What if I refuse the examination, I asked. Zafira and Caspian exchanged glances again. That quick exchange said more than all their words. They had clearly discussed this scenario in advance. Then we'll be very worried, said Zafira. Dad, you don't want us to worry about you all the time, do you? And besides, Caspian added, our state has certain procedures for cases where an elderly person refuses medical care, if relatives are concerned for their safety. The threat sounded polite, almost casual, but I heard it very clearly. Now they were speaking openly. No more hints and delicate phrases. I see, I said and took a sip of wine. So I have no choice? You do have a choice, Zafira hastened to assure me. We just want you to make a sensible decision. A sensible decision. That's what Caspian called it in the phone conversation I overheard. They didn't even bother to change the wording. What if the examination shows that I'm healthy? Then we'll all calm down, said Zafira, and we'll know that you can live on your own. What if it shows problems? Then we'll decide together what to do next. Caspian spoke in a businesslike tone, as if discussing a construction project. There are different options: a nurse, daycare, specialized institutions. In any case, Zafira added, you have nothing to worry about. We'll organize everything. We'll cover all the expenses. I wonder, I thought, what exactly they were going to spend their money on to take care of me. My pension? The money from the sale of my house? My savings, which they would have access to after declaring me incapacitated? I need to think about it, I said. Of course, Zafira agreed, but not too long. The sooner we figure everything out, the better for everyone. Dinner lasted another hour, but the conversation never returned to medical examinations. We talked about the weather, Caspian's work, Zafira's clients. But all the while, I felt their eyes on me, their appraising attention. They watched my every move, my every word, as if gathering evidence for a future case. When they finally got ready to leave, Zafira hugged me again at the door. We love you, Dad, she said, and we only want the best for you. I walked them to their car and waved goodbye. Then I went back into the house and stood in the living room for a long time, staring at the dirty plates on the table. The family dinner was over. Now a completely different game was beginning. The next visit took place a week later, on Saturday morning. I was watering the flowers on the porch when I saw Caspian's familiar car turning into my driveway. They didn't warn me they were coming, but I wasn't surprised. In recent months, Zafira had been showing up more and more often without calling ahead, as if to check whether she would find me in some inappropriate state. My daughter got out of the car first, wearing a light gray suit and carrying a large shoulder bag. Caspian followed, holding a folder with documents in his hands. They both looked serious and businesslike, as if they had come not to visit a relative, but to attend an important meeting. Hi, Dad. Zafira kissed me on the cheek. We decided to stop by and see how you're doing. Everything's fine. Come in. I put down the watering can and led them into the house. Would you like some coffee? Of course. They settled into the living room, and I noticed that Caspian immediately began to examine the room. His gaze lingered on a crack in the plaster above the fireplace, then moved to the window where the wallpaper had peeled away. I brewed coffee in an old Turkish coffee pot, just the way Martha liked it. The process required time and attention, but the result was always excellent. When I returned with the tray, Zafira and Caspian were talking quietly about something, but they fell silent when they saw me. Dad, do you remember that Mrs. Bentley called us yesterday? Zafira asked, taking a cup. I tried to remember. Mrs. Bentley had lived next door for 20 years, and we sometimes exchanged greetings over the fence. I don't remember such a call, I admitted honestly. You see, Zafira looked meaningfully at her husband. She called around 4 o'clock. She said you left the house in your pajamas and slippers to get the mail. That was absurd. I never went outside in my home clothes, not even to the mailbox in the yard. That didn't happen, I said firmly. Dad, Mrs. Bentley wouldn't make something like that up. Zafira put down her cup and took a notebook out of her bag. And that's not the only incident. Last week, Mr. Foster saw you talking to yourself in the garden. Foster lived across the street, and his windows looked directly onto my property. I did sometimes talk to myself while gardening, a habit I'd had since childhood, but to turn that into a sign of mental disorder was a stretch. Many people talk to themselves, I argued. It helps me concentrate. In your 20s or 30s, yes, Caspian agreed. But at your age, it could indicate problems, especially when combined with other symptoms. What other symptoms? Caspian opened his folder and took out several sheets of paper. I saw that they were printouts from medical websites. Forgetfulness, inappropriate behavior in public places, neglect of personal hygiene, he began to read. Social isolation, suspiciousness, refusal of help from loved ones. Caspian has studied this issue, Zafira explained. He wants to help us understand the situation. So my brother-in-law not only appraised the value of antique furniture, but also studied medical literature. Very thoughtful of him. And what did you find in my behavior? I asked. Zafira flipped through the pages of her notebook. I realized that she had been taking notes of our meetings and conversations. 3 weeks ago, you forgot the mailman's name, she began, even though Dennis has been working in our neighborhood for 5 years. I didn't forget his name. I just didn't remember it right away. 2 weeks ago, you couldn't find your glasses, even though they were on your head. That happens to everyone. Last week, you asked me twice how work was going during the same conversation. Maybe I just wanted more details. Zafira closed her notebook and looked at me with a sympathy that I found repulsive. Dad, you're not seeing the obvious, she said gently. Your memory is deteriorating. It's normal for your age, but you can't ignore the problem. What problem? I felt irritation rising. A little absent-mindedness. It's not just absent-mindedness, Caspian interjected. You're becoming a danger to yourself and those around you. Dangerous. The day before yesterday, you left the front door unlocked all night, he continued. It's a good thing the neighborhood is safe. I clearly remembered locking the door before going to bed. I checked the lock twice, as I always did, but Caspian spoke with confidence, and Zafira nodded in agreement. Besides, Zafira added, you've started forgetting to take your medication. I saw full packs of blood pressure pills in your medicine cabinet. I take them regularly. Then why are the packs unopened? I couldn't explain that. Indeed, there were several unopened blister packs in the medicine cabinet, but I was sure I had bought them in advance. Dad, we understand how difficult this is to accept, Zafira continued in a sympathetic tone, but denial only makes the situation worse. The sooner treatment begins, the better the chances of slowing down the process. What process? I put the cup down so sharply that coffee spilled onto the saucer. What are you talking about? Dementia, Caspian said calmly. Age-related changes in the brain. Something that happens to most elderly people sooner or later. The word dementia sounded like a death sentence in the living room. Zafira leaned toward me and took my hand. We're not your enemies, Dad. We want to help, but you have to be honest with yourself. Honest about what? About the fact that you can no longer live alone. Her voice became firmer. That you need constant help and supervision. That's not for you to decide. Unfortunately, Caspian interjected, in certain cases, it's not the elderly themselves who decide, but their families, when a person loses the ability to adequately assess their condition. The threat was phrased politely but unambiguously. They were moving on to open pressure. What do you suggest, I asked. For starters, a medical examination, said Zafira. A complete and objective one. Let the doctors determine the extent of the disorders. And then we'll decide together how best to organize your life. Caspian put the printouts in a folder. You may need a nurse, or daycare at a specialized center, or a move to a place where you will be safer, added Zafira. A nursing home, I clarified. A specialized facility with medical supervision, Caspian corrected. They have everything necessary for people with cognitive impairments. I got up and walked to the window. It was beautiful autumn weather outside, the trees ablaze with yellow and red. I had been looking at this street from this window for 42 years. I had seen other people's children grow up, neighbors grow old, and the city change. And now two people I considered family wanted to take this house away from me. What if I refuse? I asked without turning around. Then we'll have to go to court, Zafira said quietly, to file a petition to have you declared incompetent. Finally, an open threat. No more hints and polite phrases. On what grounds? We have witnesses to your inappropriate behavior, Caspian replied. The neighbors are ready to testify, plus medical reports on age-related changes. What medical reports? I haven't been examined yet. Dr. Mitchell has already expressed concern about your condition, Zafira said. He is ready to confirm his concerns in writing. It was a lie. A week ago, Mitchell told me I was in excellent shape for my age, but I realized they had already made a deal with someone else, someone more compliant. Dad, don't make us take this to court, Zafira continued. It will be painful for everyone. It's better to settle this peacefully, as a family. I turned to them. Zafira looked genuinely upset, and Caspian was looking at his watch. They must have had other things to do. How long are you giving me to think about it? Until the end of the week, said Caspian. We want your answer on Monday. What if I agree to the examination, and it shows that I'm healthy? Then we'll back off, Zafira assured me. But you have to undergo a full diagnosis. Not with Mitchell, but with specialists. What kind of specialists? The ones we find, Caspian replied. Doctors who specialize in age-related disorders. In other words, doctors who will give them the conclusion they want. I imagine the procedure. A series of tests designed to make any 70-year-old look inadequate. Questions with no right answers. Conclusions written in advance. Okay, I said. I'll think about it. They were about to leave, pleased with themselves. Zafira hugged me again at the door, and I felt disgust at this ostentatious display of affection. We're doing this for your own good, she said. I hope you understand that. I walked them to their car and stood on the porch until they disappeared around the bend. Then I went back into the house and straight to my bedroom. The red folder was still in the bedside table drawer. I might need it in a few days. Monday came too quickly. I spent the weekend thinking, but the decision had already been made on Saturday, right after they left. On Sunday, I checked the contents of the red folder again and made sure the voice recorder was charged and ready to go. I also called my lawyer and warned him about possible events. Zafira and Caspian arrived at exactly 7 in the evening. I deliberately set the table for dinner. I wanted everything to look like a normal family visit. Let them think I'm ready for peace talks. Well, Dad, have you made your decision? Zafira asked as soon as she crossed the threshold. She was nervous and impatient, completely unlike the caring daughter she had portrayed a week ago. Come in, sit down. Let's have dinner first, then we'll talk. I led them into the dining room. There's no time for dinner, Caspian said sharply. We have an appointment with the doctor at 8:30. If you agreed to the examination, we have to go right now. What doctor? At 8 p.m., I was surprised. Dr. Simmons sees patients at a time that is convenient for them, Zafira explained. He specializes in diagnosing cognitive disorders in the elderly. So they had already arranged everything without even waiting for my consent. What's more, they scheduled the appointment for late in the evening, when I would be tired and less focused. Very thoughtful. What if I don't agree? Then tomorrow morning we'll file the paperwork with the court, Caspian replied coldly. We already have the application and all the necessary documents. Dad, please don't complicate the situation, Zafira interjected. We agreed to resolve everything peacefully. I looked at my daughter, at her tense face, at the expensive handbag she was nervously fiddling with. That handbag surely contained the documents for establishing guardianship. Everything had been prepared in advance. All that remained was to obtain a medical report. All right, I said, but first I need to tell you something. We went into the dining room. Caspian looked pointedly at his watch, indicating that he was in a hurry. Zafira sat on the edge of her chair, ready to get up at any moment. Hurry up, she urged. Dr. Simmons doesn't like people to be late. This concerns our family. I poured myself a glass of water and took a sip. Sapphira, I want you to know that I've always been proud of you. Dad, don't be sentimental. She was clearly annoyed. When you got your insurance agent's license, I was the happiest father in the world. When you married Caspian, I thought you would have a wonderful family. What are you getting at? Caspian asked. That people change. I stood up and walked over to the window. Sometimes money turns children into strangers. What do you mean? Sapphira also stood up, and there was a dangerous note in her voice. I mean that you are trying to steal my house and my savings under the guise of caring for my health? Silence fell. Caspian and Sapphira exchanged glances, and I saw in their eyes not surprise but anger at being exposed. You're paranoid, Caspian said. It's another symptom of age-related changes. Maybe, I returned to the table, but paranoids are sometimes right. Dad, no one is going to steal your money, Sapphira began, but her voice trembled. We just want you to be safe. Safe from whom? From you. From yourself, she exploded. You are no longer capable of living on your own. You are forgetful, absent-minded, inadequate. And you're greedy and deceitful, I replied calmly. But I'm still your father. Sapphira turned pale. Caspian put his hand on her shoulder, as if to restrain her. Enough of this circus, he said. We're going to the doctor, or we'll call an ambulance and take you by force. Force you? By what right? By the right of relatives who are concerned about the mental state of a sick person. Caspian took out his phone. It's a perfectly legal procedure in our state. I realized there was no more time for talking. They were ready to act immediately. You know what? I said. You're right. I am indeed ill. Sapphira raised her eyebrows in surprise. I am ill with excessive trust, I continued. I believed for too long that you love me, not my money. Dad, stop it, Sapphira shouted. You're crazy. You're paranoid. You need help. And you, my daughter, are out of this family. I said it so loudly and clearly that the words echoed throughout the house. Sapphira froze with her mouth open. Caspian looked at me as if I had truly lost my mind. What did you say? Sapphira whispered. You are no longer my daughter, I repeated slowly and clearly. You are expelled from the family. Forever. Caspian smiled contemptuously. Pure senility, he said. Sapphira, don't pay any attention to him. Tomorrow he won't even remember what he said. But I had already walked over to the sideboard and taken a thin red folder out of the bottom drawer. I placed it on the table in front of them. Well, I said calmly, then you should see this. Sapphira and Caspian stared at the folder as if it were a snake. They intuitively understood that it contained nothing good for them. What is it? Sapphira asked, her voice hoarse. Open it and see. Caspian was the first to reach for the folder. He opened it and saw a stack of documents, photographs, in a small voice recorder. His face changed rapidly from bewilderment to understanding, then to horror. What the hell is this? He whispered. Evidence, I replied. Evidence of your conspiracy against me. Sapphira snatched the folder from her husband's hands and began feverishly leafing through its contents. I saw her recognize photocopies of documents that had disappeared from my desk. I saw her find legal references to fraud against the elderly. Dad, what does this mean? She asked in a trembling voice. It means I've been recording your phone calls for the last 2 months. I picked up the tape recorder and pressed play. Sapphira's familiar voice came out of the speaker. Yes, he has no idea. I think we'll be able to get custody by Christmas. The house is worth at least $400,000, plus his savings. Sapphira grabbed the recorder and turned it off. You were eavesdropping, she shouted. You were spying on us. And you were trying to rob me, I replied calmly. Which one of us is the criminal? Caspian was silent, but his face turned gray. He understood the consequences better than his wife. How many recordings? He asked quietly. Enough. I took the folder back. Enough to put you both in jail for fraud and abuse of an elderly person. We didn't steal anything, Sapphira exclaimed. We just wanted to help. Help yourselves to my money. I carefully put the documents back in the folder. I have recordings of 17 of your phone conversations. They discuss in detail the plan to have me declared incompetent, obtain guardianship, sell my house, and distribute the money. Caspian cleared his throat and tried to pull himself together. This is all misrepresented, he said, taken out of context. Want to hear more? I turned the recorder back on. Caspian's voice. The old fool doesn't even realize we've already found a buyer for the house. The realtor says we can get $50,000 more if we sell quickly. Turn it off, Zafira shouted. But the recording continued. Zafira's voice. What if he refuses to be examined? Caspian's voice. Then we'll have him committed. I have a doctor friend who will sign any certificate for a good price. Now they were both silent. Zafira cried, smearing mascara across her cheeks. Caspian sat motionless, staring at the table. We'll explain everything, he finally said. It's a misunderstanding. 17 recordings is a misunderstanding? I looked at my daughter, who had turned into a pitiful, sobbing creature. Fake medical certificates are a misunderstanding? Dad, we're your family, Zafira whispered. You can't. I already told you. You're out of the family. I stood up and walked to the window. And if you don't get out of my house in 10 minutes, I'll call the police. Horror reigned at the table. They finally realized that their plan had not just failed, it had backfired. The minutes dragged on in dead silence. Zafira wiped her tears with a paper napkin I handed her mechanically. My habit of caring for my daughter proved stronger than my disgust. Caspian drummed his fingers on the table, feverishly considering his options. I stood by the window, watching the neighbor's cat hunting sparrows in my garden. Life went on as usual, while in my dining room, the world was falling apart. Dad, Zafira finally said quietly, let me explain. Explain what? I didn't turn around. How you plan to steal my house? We weren't stealing, she snapped. We were thinking about your future. I turned and looked at her. Her mascara was smeared across her cheeks. Her lipstick was smudged. Her hair was tousled. The successful businesswoman had turned into a caught thief. My future in a nursing home? Your secure future, Zafira stood up, trying to regain her dignity. You don't understand how worried we were. You live alone in a huge house. You're getting older. Your memory... My memory works perfectly. I opened the red folder and took out a sheet of paper. Here, for example, is an entry from October 15th. Would you like me to quote it verbatim? Zafira paled but nodded. Zafira calls Caspian. Time of recording, 14:37. I put on my glasses and began to read. Zafira, I was at my father's yesterday. He's completely gone. He forgot the postman's name. Caspian, that's good for our case. Write it down in your notebook. Zafira, already written it down. He also left the stove on. Caspian, write that down too. The more facts we have, the easier it will be to prove his incapacity. Stop, Zafira shouted. You're taking things out of context. What context? I turned the page. This context, maybe? Caspian, the realtor valued the house at $420,000. If we sell quickly, we can get $450,000. Zafira, what about the furniture? Caspian, the antiques are separate. That's another $30,000. Caspian stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. Enough, he barked. You recorded us illegally. This is a violation of privacy. In my own home, I calmly adjusted my glasses. When you're discussing the theft of my property, I think the court will be understanding. What theft? Zafira clutched her head. We wanted to take care of you. Take care of my money. I found the right page. Here's the entry from October 22nd. Zafira, found a copy of the will in his desk. He's leaving everything to me. Caspian, great. So after he's declared incapacitated, the property automatically passes to your control. Zafira, what if he changes his mind and rewrites the will? Caspian, that's why we need to hurry. An incapacitated person cannot change their will. We weren't going to rob you, Zafira sobbed. We were going to use your money to support you. To support me in a nursing home for $1,500 a month, I smirked. And where would the rest of the money go? To treatment, to medicine. Zafira stumbled over her words. For your new house, I prompted. Here's an entry from October 28th. Caspian, if everything goes smoothly, we'll be able to buy that house in Riverdale by spring. The one for $600,000. Zafira, will there be enough money? Caspian, more than enough. My father's house plus his savings is about 700,000. Minus the nursing home expenses, we'll have more than 500,000 left. Caspian buried his head in his hands. He understood that every sentence in the notes was a nail in the coffin of their plans. Listen, father-in-law, he began, trying to sound calm. Some of our conversations may sound wrong, but we were really worried about your health. My health? I found another recording. Caspian calls an unknown number. Time of recording, 4:20 p.m. Do you want to hear it? No. Wait, Zafira and Caspian shouted simultaneously. I do. I turned on the recorder at the right place. Caspian's voice. Dr. Simmons, this is Caspian Langford. We had an agreement about my father-in-law. Yes, 73 years old. We need a diagnosis of dementia. Of course, I understand that you can't make a diagnosis without seeing him. But if he comes in for an appointment, how much will it cost? I turned off the recording. Zafira covered her face with her hands. So, I said, does Dr. Simmons take money for fake diagnoses? It's not what you think, exclaimed Caspian. I just wanted to know if he could objectively assess your condition. For money? I shook my head. Objectively, for money? Dad, please. Zafira knelt down next to my chair. We really thought we were doing the right thing. You yourself said that you sometimes forget things. I never said that. You did. Last summer you complained that you couldn't find your glasses. Once in 5 years? Is that a reason to declare me crazy? Zafira sniffed and tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. We didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. We just wanted to be sure about your future. My future, I corrected her. A future with my money. No, she shook her head. Yes, we talked about the house and the money, but only because we wanted to get everything right. If you ended up in the hospital, who would pay for your treatment? If you needed care, where would the money come from? I have insurance. I have savings. I have a good head on my shoulders. But we're your family, Caspian exclaimed. We have a right to worry. Family. I got up and went to the sideboard where our family photos were kept. I took a picture of the three of us, Zafira, Caspian, and me, standing by the Christmas tree 2 years ago. Families don't steal from each other. We didn't steal from you. Zafira also got up, wiping away her tears. We plan to use your money for your own good. For my own good in a nursing home for $1,500 a month while you buy a house for $600,000? This house would be for you too, she said quickly. We would have a guest room you could come visit. Visit my own house? How generous of you. Caspian tried to intervene in the conversation. Listen, maybe we didn't express ourselves very well on the phone, but our intentions were honest. We saw that you were getting older, that it was becoming difficult for you to manage the house. I'm 73, not 103. I'm doing just fine. Then why are you so suspicious of us? Zafira asked. Why are you recording our conversations? That's paranoia. It's caution. I put the photo back in its place, which turned out to be justified. Dad, we can fix everything. Zafira grabbed my sleeve. We'll never talk about the nursing home again. You can live here as long as you want. On my own land? Thanks for letting me. That's not what I meant. She threw her hands up in despair. Dad, give us a chance. We'll make it up to you. Do better? I opened the folder to the last page. Want to hear last Thursday's recording? Zafira, tomorrow is the last conversation with the old man. If he doesn't agree voluntarily, we'll take coercive measures. Caspian, I have everything ready. Tomorrow at 8 in the morning, we'll file a petition with the court for incapacitation. Zafira, what if he resists? Caspian, then orderlies and forced hospitalization. After a psychiatric evaluation, he'll become quiet and compliant. A dead silence fell. Even Zafira's sobs stopped. So tomorrow morning you were going to take me to a psychiatrist in a straitjacket? I asked, almost curiously. No one answered. Caspian stared at the floor. Zafira bit her lip. Well, I said, and closed the folder. Now you know that I know everything. I took a thick document with a blue cover out of the folder and placed it on the table in front of them. The stamp of the law firm, Harrison & Partners, was clearly visible in the corner. Caspian and Zafira stared at the document as if it were a time bomb. What is this? Zafira asked hoarsely. A legal opinion, I replied calmly. Very detailed and very unpleasant for you. Caspian reached for the document, but I covered his hand with mine. Just listen for now, I said. My lawyer spent 2 weeks studying your actions. The result was impressive. I opened the opinion on the first page and put on my glasses. Attempting to fraudulently obtain the property of an elderly person by falsely declaring them incompetent is classified under Article 173 of the Criminal Code as fraud on a particularly large scale. I looked at them over my glasses. Particularly large scale means over $1 million. The punishment is 5 to 10 years imprisonment. Zafira turned even paler, if that was possible. But we didn't steal anything, she whispered. We only planned to. Planning is already an attempt to commit a crime. I turned the page. Falsifying medical documents in order to have a healthy person declared incapacitated is a particularly serious crime. Another 3 to 7 years. We didn't falsify any documents, exclaimed Caspian. What about the conversation with Dr. Simmons? I found the right place in the conclusion. Bribing a medical professional for a false conclusion qualifies as corruption in the healthcare sector. 2 to 5 years plus disqualification from certain activities. Caspian nervously licked his lips. His engineering career could be over before it even began. These are all assumptions, he said, trying to pull himself together. You have no proof that we were actually going to do anything. 17 audio recordings aren't proof? I smirked. Here's what a lawyer says about the recordings. Audio recordings made by the owner of a dwelling when recording conversations on their own property are admissible as evidence in court. But we didn't know we were being recorded, Zafira protested. This is provocation. Provocation is when you are pushed into committing a crime. You planned it yourself. I showed her the next page. The recordings demonstrate long-term planning of a fraudulent scheme involving corrupt medical professionals and forged documents. Zafira covered her face with her hands and began to cry quietly. Caspian stood up and began pacing the room like a caged animal. Okay, he said, stopping at the window. Let's say some of our conversations look compromising, but nothing happened. We didn't get a cent. Because I stopped you, I turned a few pages. But attempted fraud is punished just as severely as a completed crime. Dad, please. Zephyr knelt down next to my chair. Forgive us. We swear we'll never even think about it again. You swear? I looked at her closely. Like you swore to love and care for me? We did care. In your own way. Like thieves. Caspian turned sharply toward us. Listen, old man, he said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. You shouldn't go this far. Think about the consequences. What consequences? I looked at him calmly. What will happen if you end up completely alone? Caspian moved closer, looming over my chair. Without family, without support, who will visit you in your old age? Who will take care of you when you really get sick? Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. His voice became harsh. You have only one daughter. If you lose her, you will be completely alone. Better alone than with thieves. Thieves? Caspian clenched his fists. We are your family. We have a right to this property. What right? The right of heirs. He no longer hid his anger. The rights of people who have spent years caring for an ungrateful old man. Caring? I laughed. When was the last time you visited me just because? When was the last time you called to see how I was doing, not to check on my mental state? Caspian had no answer, and I continued. Now listen to what else is written in the conclusion. I found the right page. In the event of a report to law enforcement, the immediate arrest of the suspects is recommended to prevent the destruction of evidence. You wouldn't dare, Zafira shouted. I will. I already have. I closed the document. Copies of all the records and the legal opinion are in my lawyer's safe. If anything happens to me, an accident, sudden illness, mysterious disappearance, all the materials will automatically be handed over to the police. Caspian turned pale. You think we could hurt you? Couldn't you? I stood up and walked toward him. Despite the age difference, he backed away. A man who plans to steal the home and savings of a helpless old man is capable of many things. We're not helpless animals, Zafira exclaimed. No, you're worse. Animals don't betray their young. I returned to the table and gathered the documents into a folder. And you betrayed the father who raised and loved you. Dad, we can fix everything. Zafira tried to grab my hand. Give us a chance. We'll earn back your trust. Earn it back? I carefully closed the folder. What exactly are you going to earn back? The years you spent deceiving me? The nights I lay awake, thinking I was going crazy? The certainty that I had a family? You do have a family, she cried. We are your family. I had a family. I looked at the photo of Martha on the dresser. Now I only have memories of her. Caspian apparently decided to try a different tactic. Okay, he said in a calmer tone. Let's say we made a mistake. People make mistakes, but we can settle this amicably without the police and the courts, right? Amicably, I smirked. What do you suggest? We'll leave your life forever. You'll destroy the recordings. We'll all forget and move on. An interesting suggestion. I pretended to think it over. What's to stop me from agreeing today and handing the recordings over to the police tomorrow? Your word of honor, Zafira said quickly. You're a decent person. I am decent. Are you? They exchanged glances, and I saw that they were already considering the possibility of deceiving me again. No, I said firmly. It won't work amicably. It's too late for an amicable solution. Then what? Caspian asked. What do you want from us? I already told you. For you to disappear from my life. And the recordings? I'll keep the recordings, as a guarantee that you really will disappear. I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtains. It's getting dark outside. I advise you to hurry. Hurry where? Zafira didn't understand. Home. To pack your bags. I turned to them. Tomorrow morning, I'll hand over all the materials to the district prosecutor's office. What? They exclaimed simultaneously. I warned you. If you don't leave town by tomorrow morning, I'll file a criminal case. You can't kick us out of town, Caspian shouted. We have jobs and a home here. You can stay, I shrugged, but then you'll be arrested. Zafira clutched her heart. Dad, this is our home. We live here. My home was mine too, but that didn't stop you. I glanced at my watch. You have 12 hours until 9 in the morning. What if we don't leave? Caspian asked defiantly. Then at 10 in the morning, detectives from the county police department will be looking for you. They understood that I wasn't joking. There was not a hint of doubt or pity in my voice. Dad, Zafira whispered, you won't do that. You love me. I did, I corrected her. Past tense. The silence dragged on for several long minutes that seemed like an eternity to me. Caspian and Zafira stood in the middle of my living room like stone statues, not daring to move. I could clearly see them feverishly considering various options for getting out of the situation, looking for some loophole, some way to avoid responsibility for their actions. The situation, which an hour ago had seemed brilliantly thought out and practically foolproof, had suddenly turned into a hopeless trap. From time to time, they glanced at each other furtively, trying to understand from the expression on the other's face what they were thinking, what options they were considering, but neither of them dared to speak first and thus admit defeat. I calmly and methodically put all the documents into a red folder, neatly arranged them in order, and closed the folder with a small copper lock that I had inherited from my father. The sound of the lock clicking in the dead silence of the living room was like a single gunshot. Zephyr shuddered convulsively, and Caspian instinctively clenched his fists even tighter until his knuckles turned white. So, I finally said in as calm and businesslike a tone as I could muster, let me state my terms clearly, unambiguously, and for the last time. They both looked at me with the expression of people awaiting a death sentence. In their eyes, I saw a mixture of fear, despair, and barely contained anger that their cunning plan had failed in the most humiliating way. The first and most important condition, you leave my house immediately right now, this very minute. Take your personal belongings, if you have any here, and leave through the front door. You will not return here under any circumstances, not for conversations, not to sort things out, not to attempt reconciliation. Dad, Zafira began in a trembling, pleading voice, but I raised my hand decisively, gesturing for her to stop. The second condition, you will never, under any circumstances, try to contact me in any way. No phone calls to my home or cell phone. No letters or postcards in the mail. No emails. No attempts to meet somewhere, supposedly by chance in a store or on the street. You will completely and permanently disappear from my life, as if you never existed. But we, Caspian tried to interject. The third condition, I continued, ignoring him. If you try to continue your criminal plans against me through other people, any lawyers, doctors, social workers, child welfare officials, I will immediately on the same day hand over all my records and documents to the district attorney's office. Any attempts to initiate proceedings to have me declared incompetent will automatically be considered a direct continuation of your fraudulent conspiracy. Caspian opened his mouth to object, but I didn't give him the chance. The fourth condition, you will leave the city of Selbyville within the next 2 weeks, permanently and irrevocably. Sell your house, terminate your employment contracts, resign from your current jobs and move to another city. I strongly recommend choosing a city in another state, preferably as far away from here as possible. That's completely impossible, exclaimed Caspian, his voice betraying undisguised panic. I have a long-term contract to build a new shopping center. The project is scheduled to last 6 months. Zephyr has regular customers who rely on her. That's entirely your personal problem. I shrugged indifferently. You can explain to your employers and customers that you have to leave urgently due to urgent family circumstances. It will even be true. We can't just up and disappear from the city. Zafira took a desperate step toward me, reaching out her hands in a pleading gesture. We have a whole life here, friends. Plans for the future. I had a whole life too, I reminded her calmly, and plans for a peaceful old age surrounded by a loving family. But for some reason, that didn't stop you. Caspian began pacing nervously from corner to corner of the living room, waving his arms and clearly trying to find some convincing argument. Listen, this is completely absurd, he exclaimed, stopping right in front of me. You can't make us quit our jobs and leave town. You simply don't have the authority to do that. It's not in your power. I have 17 audio recordings of your criminal plans, I reminded him in a completely calm tone, plus a legal opinion on the classification of your actions. That gives me very specific powers. We can file a counterclaim in court. Caspian tried to go on the offensive. For illegally recording private telephone conversations, for violating the right to privacy. Be sure to try, I smiled. My lawyer will be very happy to demonstrate to the jury exactly what private conversations I recorded in my own home. I think they will be sympathetic to your complaints. The fifth condition, I continued, without waiting for further objections. If I die within the next 10 years under any suspicious circumstances, accident, sudden illness, mysterious disappearance, poisoning, all of my materials will be automatically transferred not only to the local police, but also to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My lawyer has received detailed instructions and the necessary authority. Do you really think we're capable of murder? Zafira gasped, her voice breaking into a high note. To be honest, 2 months ago, I was absolutely sure that you weren't capable of fraud, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. As you can see, I was cruelly mistaken in my assessment of your moral character. And the sixth and final condition, I continued after a short pause, you voluntarily renounce all rights to my inheritance. You sign the relevant notarized document of renunciation, officially and irrevocably. What? Caspian flushed with indignation and took a few quick steps toward me. This is our legal inheritance. We have every right to it. You had the right, I corrected him coldly, in the past tense, until you decided to obtain this inheritance by fraudulent means, without waiting for my natural death. But I'm your only daughter, Zafira cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. You have no other heirs. There's no one to leave the property to. I'll find other heirs, I replied calmly. There are many worthy charities in the world that would be sincerely happy to receive a large donation and use it for the benefit of society. Charity? Caspian clutched his head with both hands. You're going to give our money to complete strangers? Not your money, I corrected him in an icy tone. My money. And yes, I would definitely prefer to give it to strangers who are honest people than to leave it to my own thieves and swindlers. Zafira collapsed into the nearest chair and burst into tears like a little child. Her shoulders shook with inconsolable sobs. Black mascara ran down her cheeks in ugly streaks, and her carefully styled hair was a mess. Caspian stood next to his wife, but made no attempt to comfort her. He was too shocked by the prospect of losing his expected inheritance to think about anyone else's feelings. Dad, this is impossible, Zafira sobbed between gasps. I'm your own daughter, your only daughter. Blood of your blood. You were my daughter, I said quietly but clearly, in the past tense. Now you are nobody to me, but I didn't mean you any real harm. Honestly, I didn't. She tried to get up from the chair, but her legs wouldn't hold her. I just, I was just very afraid for your future, for what would happen to you when you got really old. Afraid that you wouldn't be able to get my inheritance quickly enough, I clarified ruthlessly. No, she shook her head desperately. I was afraid that you would be left all alone, helpless, that you would be miserable and scared. I was already miserable and scared, I admitted. The last 2 months have been very bad and scary for me. Every visit from you turned into sophisticated torture. Every conversation turned into a humiliating interrogation. You methodically turned my everyday life into a real nightmare. We just wanted to help you, she kept repeating. Help yourselves at my expense, I corrected her dispassionately. Now listen to me very carefully. You have only one choice. There is no third option. Either you unconditionally accept all of my terms in full, or tomorrow at 9 in the morning, I will personally go to the district police station and file an official statement to initiate a criminal case. Caspian tried to pull himself together and move on to more constructive business negotiations. All right, he said, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead with a white handkerchief. Let's say we are theoretically willing to agree to some of your conditions, but completely renouncing the inheritance is too much. Let's try to find a reasonable compromise that will suit everyone. What kind of compromise do you have in mind? I asked. We will leave your life forever, as you demand. We will move to another city and start life with a clean slate, but we will retain our legal inheritance. It's fair. It's according to the law. According to the law? I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Was it according to the law to plan my forced placement in a nursing home based on false medical reports? It was an unfortunate misunderstanding, Caspian hastily objected. We just expressed ourselves poorly in those phone conversations. We didn't say what we meant. 17 times in a row you expressed yourselves poorly, I clarified. For 2 months in a row you said things you didn't mean? We were just theoretically discussing various possible scenarios. We were making plans for the distant future just in case. Just in case what? I pressed relentlessly. In case I don't die quickly enough and interfere with your plans for too long? Caspian realized he had fallen into the trap again and fell silent, staring gloomily at the floor. Listen to me very carefully, I said, looking from one to the other. I am stating my final terms once and for all. No further negotiations, no compromises, no delays for reflection, no attempts to bargain. Either you accept all of my conditions in their entirety without any changes, or tomorrow morning you will meet with Detective Johnson from the county police department. How do you even know this detective's name? Caspian asked suspiciously and cautiously. Because I had a detailed conversation with him a week ago, I replied calmly and took a white business card out of my breast pocket. I thoroughly familiarized him with the overall situation and showed him the preliminary materials. He carefully studied all the documents and is waiting for my final decision tomorrow morning. Zafira suddenly stopped crying and stared at the card with wide, horrified eyes. So you've already decided everything in advance, she whispered in a hoarse voice. You betrayed us even before we talked. I betrayed you? I couldn't believe my ears. After everything you deliberately planned against me, you still dare to accuse me of betrayal? We're family, she exclaimed, jumping up from her chair. Family. Families don't turn each other into the police. Families don't steal from each other under the guise of caring, I replied harshly. And you ceased to be my family the moment you decided to steal my property by falsely declaring me insane. Caspian finally realized that the time for negotiations and persuasion was irrevocably over. He resolutely grabbed his wife by the arm and pulled her toward the living room door. Let's go, Zafira. There's nothing more to do here. We urgently need to consider the situation and make a decision. There's not much to consider, I said coldly after them. There are only two options. Either you agree to my terms unconditionally, or you prepare to serve time in federal prison for large-scale fraud. They stopped right at the threshold of the living room. Caspian slowly turned and looked at me with poorly concealed hatred and a thirst for revenge. You'll regret this bitterly, old man, he said quietly but clearly. When you're left in this house all alone, without a single living soul around, you'll definitely regret your decision. I highly doubt that, I replied calmly. Complete solitude is 1,000 times better than living side by side with vile traitors. You have until tomorrow morning, I reminded him, glancing at my watch. Detective Johnson is expecting my call at exactly 9 o'clock. Don't be late with your decision. They left the house, slamming the front door so hard that the windows in every room rattled. I slowly walked over to the living room window and watched them until they reached their car. Caspian started the engine with such fury that it roared throughout the neighborhood, and Zafira didn't even try to turn around and wave goodbye, as she always did before. When the red taillights of their car finally disappeared around the far bend in the street, I felt real relief for the first time in several hours. The most difficult, most painful part of this difficult confrontation was finally over. The house was empty, not physically. The furniture was still there. The books were on the shelves. The clock was ticking on the mantelpiece. But something invisible had changed in the atmosphere. The tension I had been carrying around for the last few months without fully realizing its weight had disappeared. Now that the threat was gone, I felt as if I had taken a heavy backpack off my shoulders after a long hike on a mountain trail. I walked slowly through the house, stopping in each room and checking the locks on the doors and windows. It was an old habit, left over from the days when Martha and little Zafira lived in the house. Back then, I locked the house at night to protect my family from strangers on the street. Now it was to protect myself from those I once considered the closest people on earth. In the living room, I cleared the dishes from the table, which had remained untouched since their visit. Zafira and Caspian were too excited and tense to think about food, and their appetite was unlikely to return in the coming days, especially after they learned of the consequences of their actions. I rinsed the plates in the sink and carefully placed them in a special rack to dry. The mechanical, familiar actions calmed my nerves and restored a sense of normality and control over the situation. I took the red folder to the bedroom and hid it again in the bottom drawer of the bedside table, under Martha's old letters. First thing tomorrow morning, I would call the lawyer and report in detail on the results of today's conversation. He would be satisfied. His strategy had worked flawlessly, exactly as planned. The legal opinion had exactly the psychological effect we had hoped for when we developed our countermeasures. I sat down in my favorite armchair by the fireplace and for the first time in a very long time, tried to just sit quietly, thinking about nothing. Not listening to every sound in the house, not analyzing every phone call, not looking for signs that someone was rummaging through my personal belongings again, not planning defensive measures or thinking about possible scenarios, just sitting in silence and letting my thoughts flow freely. Outside the window, the November darkness had fallen. Streetlights illuminated the empty road. All the neighbors had already gone home, gone to bed, or were watching evening television programs in their cozy living rooms. The normal, peaceful life of a small American town, which I had become a part of again after long months of isolation and suspicion. No one was planning to steal my house anymore. No one was discussing my supposed incapacity. No one was considering me a convenient source of easy money. Strangely enough, I felt no triumphant joy or malicious satisfaction at having exposed my enemies. Rather, it was a sad relief, like after a painful but absolutely necessary surgical operation. The wound will heal over time, but the scar from this story will remain in my soul forever. And this invisible scar will constantly remind me that even the closest and dearest people can betray you without hesitation for money. I got up and slowly walked over to the old mahogany dresser, where our family photos stood in frames on a white lace doily. Here is Zafira at 3 years old, laughing carefree on a swing in the city park, with pigtails and a bright red dress. Here she is in her white graduation dress, proud and happy, with her school diploma in her hands. Here is our first photo together with Caspian after our engagement. Young, in love, full of bright plans for our future together. When exactly did all this change? At what point did a loving, caring daughter turn into a cold-blooded swindler, ready to steal from her own father? When did my mother's lessons of honesty and decency give way to greed and cynicism? Perhaps this change happened gradually, so imperceptibly and slowly that I simply failed to notice it in time. Perhaps it began immediately after Martha's death, when Zafira first truly realized that she was now the sole heir to the entire family fortune. Or maybe the seeds of greed and selfishness had always been quietly dormant somewhere deep within her character, patiently waiting for the right moment and the right circumstances to sprout and blossom. I picked up a photograph of Zafira on her wedding day, she in a white dress with a veil, I in a dark suit, both smiling at the camera, and looked long and intently at her young, happy face. She looked so sincere, so full of genuine love for her new husband and deep gratitude to her father, who had organized and paid for the lavish celebration. Could it be that even then, standing at the altar in a white dress and reciting her vows of fidelity, she was secretly thinking about how much her father's house on Maple Street might be worth in the future? Or did those dirty, selfish thoughts come much later, when her initial romantic feelings for her husband gradually gave way to dry, practical considerations and financial calculations? Caspian has also changed dramatically during his years of marriage to my daughter. When they first met and started dating, he seemed like a pleasant, well-mannered young man, polite, well-educated, determined, and ambitious, but by no means greedy or dishonest. He worked as an engineer for a reputable construction company, earned a decent salary for his age, and was methodically building his professional career. What exactly made him become an active participant in a cunning, fraudulent scheme? Serious debts? Major business failures? Failed investments? Or was it simply that the temptation of easy money proved much stronger than moral principles and human decency? I carefully put the wedding photo back on the dresser, but turned it to face the wall so I wouldn't have to see the happy smiles. Perhaps with time, I will be able to look at these precious family photos again without acute emotional pain and feelings of betrayal. But definitely not today or tomorrow. Today, memories of those distant, happy times cause too much pain, too fresh for me to bear. In the kitchen, I slowly brewed myself a strong cup of tea with lemon and sat down at the same table where Martha and I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 40 long years of our life together. She always sat to my right, closer to the large window overlooking the courtyard, so she could better see the birds that flew to the feeder hanging from the old apple tree. Early in the morning, bright red cardinals usually flew to the feeder, and in the evening, nimble gray-blue titmus. Martha knew the habits and customs of all our feathered neighbors perfectly and sincerely rejoiced at their regular appearance, as if meeting old friends. If my dear Martha were still alive, would the same thing happen with Sapphira? Would our daughter have dared to try to deceive not only her elderly father, but also her loving mother? Or would her mother's keen intuition have unraveled her daughter's insidious plans much earlier than I did? However, such reflections are completely useless and only cause additional pain. Marty has been gone for 12 years now, and I have had to deal with family betrayal all alone, relying only on my own strength. I wondered how many elderly people across the country face similar problems in their own families every year. How many defenseless elderly people regularly fall victim to their own children and grandchildren, who simply cannot wait patiently to receive their inheritance? During our consultations, my lawyer repeatedly said that such cases have become much more frequent in recent years throughout America. People are living much longer thanks to advances in medicine, and the cost of treatment and care is constantly rising. As a result, the younger generation increasingly sees their elderly parents and grandparents not as an invaluable source of wisdom and rich experience, but as a heavy financial burden that seriously prevents them from living a full and free life. But reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that it was not only and not so much about money. The fact is that somewhere along the way, modern society has completely lost the correct understanding of what it really means to be a real family. Family is not only certain rights and privileges, but also serious responsibilities towards loved ones. It is not only receiving an inheritance, but also taking care of those who need help on a daily basis. It is not only about constantly receiving benefits, but also about being willing to give when necessary. Zafira and Caspian stubbornly saw only one side of the coin that was beneficial to them and deliberately forgot about the existence of the other, inconvenient side. Perhaps I am partly to blame for the tragedy that occurred. Maybe I really did spoil Zafira too much in her childhood and youth, failing to teach her to truly appreciate what she had, to perceive material goods not as a given, but as the result of hard work. Perhaps I gave her too much pocket money when she was studying at an expensive private college, and she gradually got used to the idea that her father would always help her financially in any difficult situation. Perhaps after Martha's sudden death, I became overly soft, too trusting and indulgent toward my daughter, and Zafira decided that she could now manipulate her elderly father with impunity for her own benefit. But all these painful maybes and ifs no longer had any practical significance for the future. What happened happened, and no one can change the past. Now I have to learn to live with the painful consequences of family betrayal and try to build the rest of my life without rose-colored illusions about family loyalty and the selfless love of loved ones. I slowly finish my cold tea and carefully wash the cup in the sink. Tomorrow, early in the morning, a whole new chapter of my life will begin. I am already 73 years old, but I am still physically healthy and mentally alert enough to live the rest of my years in an interesting, fulfilling, and useful way for myself and those around me. Without constant, exhausting fear, without agonizing suspicions, without the daily need to defend myself from those people who, by all laws of nature and morality, should have protected me from external threats. Perhaps it is time to make new acquaintances with interesting people of my generation. Selbyville has a fairly active senior citizens club, a library literary circle, and a volunteer organization at the city hospital. For so many years, I consciously avoided unnecessary social contact, sincerely preferring the quiet company of my family to noisy gatherings of strangers. Now I suddenly have free time and a sincere desire to meet people who share my interests and hobbies, rather than secretly plotting to take advantage of my movable and immovable property. Perhaps I will even be able to find a useful way to help other elderly people who have faced or will face similar family problems. My painful experience of successfully fighting sophisticated family fraud may well prove useful to those unfortunate people who do not yet understand the real scale of the threat posed by their own children and grandchildren. During our last meeting, the lawyer mentioned that there are plans to set up a special advisory center in the city for the comprehensive protection of the legal rights of elderly people. Perhaps I will be able to take an active and useful part in this important work, contributing my knowledge and experience. Before going to bed, I once again slowly walked around the entire house, from the basement to the attic, carefully checking that all the windows and doors were properly locked and all the electrical appliances were turned off. In every room, I physically felt a deep sense of peace and tranquility that I had not known for many months of continuous stress. My home has once again become my reliable fortress and safe haven, rather than a field of fierce battle for survival. Here, among familiar walls and things dear to my heart, I will spend the rest of my life, calmly, with dignity, with my head held high, without fear of those whom I once loved sincerely and selflessly. As I settled into my bed under the warm blanket that Martha had knitted with her own hands during long winter evenings, I firmly decided that tomorrow I would definitely call Detective Johnson and inform him that I did not yet intend to officially file a criminal complaint. Let Zafira and Caspian decide for themselves whether to accept my harsh but fair terms or stubbornly risk serious criminal prosecution. They had exactly 2 weeks to think seriously and make a final decision, and I sincerely hope that common sense would ultimately prevail over wounded pride and foolish stubbornness. Falling asleep in the peace and quiet of my own home, I felt truly free for the first time in many months.